Thank you and good evening. My name is Andy Tiska. I'm the chair of the Bristol Warren Joint Finance Committee. And I'd like first to take the opportunity for everyone to introduce themselves. We do not have name tags, so I think it would be helpful to start from my left, and we'll work our way around. And please introduce yourself.
Good evening. Carrie Cronin, Warren Town Council.
Joseph D. Pasquale, Warren Town Council.
Edward P. Stewart Jr., Bristol Town Council.
Mary Perella, Bristol Town Council.
Steve Contenti, Bristol Town Administrator.
Nathan Calero, Bristol Town Council.
Thank you, everyone, and I appreciate all of you taking your time out this evening to attend this meeting. I'd also like to thank, in the audience, I think, are many of our school committee members. So maybe you can raise your hand. I see Brian, Aaron, Bill, Diane. Very good. Thank you for coming tonight, and thank you for all of your hard work throughout the year. So I'd like to call this meeting to order and start with a little overview so that you can understand the goal that I have for this meeting today, so we can work towards accomplishing some action. First, I'd like to, through a presentation, help everyone understand better the financial obligation to maintain the programs and investments that the school department has made towards providing a high-performing school district. And so we'll do that by looking at a series of numbers, 3-year projections that the school department administration has put together. Very coarse look at what is necessary to fund our education for the next 3 years. Secondly, we'll revisit the decreasing state aid. These are numbers which are new numbers presented to the school department a couple of weeks ago, and it's an important part of the equation, obviously, because what's left over is the local contributions that is split between the towns of Bristol and Warren. And we'll look at that split based on those projections over the next 3 years. And then I think it'll be clear that when we look at the necessary funds that the local communities need to come up with, that we need to consider some action to determine what is actually the gap between what is needed from the local communities and what are they actually able to allocate towards education. I don't anticipate tonight we'll be able to come up with answers on how to close that gap, but I think we need to first come up with a plan to identify what the gap is. So our first order of business is approval of the minutes from our last JFC meeting, which was in March, and those minutes were forwarded to the committee members prior to this meeting, and had time to review them. We'd be glad to take amendments or modifications to those minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from March 16th of 2017.
Second.
Okay, and motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, so motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, ayes have it. Thank you. Secondly, the committee members were forwarded an update packet, a series of numbers, piles and piles of numbers that were provided by the school department related to budget versus actuals for the year to date, as well as some other correspondence related to the numbers that we'll be looking at later this evening, state aid, local contribution split, et cetera. So I'd like to offer time to the committee members to present questions or comments to the update packet, if they have any, and I believe that representatives from the school department are here to address any of those questions.
about this sheet here? Are we doing that now?
Absolutely, yep, that sheet was included in the update packet, and
This
now would
was-
be an appropriate time to ask
Okay,
questions.
okay,
Yep.
good. This was from the original email you sent, one of the attachments, one of the financial attachments.
Correct.
And just for my own clarification and maybe for understanding to those here. So I'm looking at these columns, and the first column, this is the intermediate or intermediate level budget comparison. So we have in the first column the approved budget for 2017, 2018 that we are in the midst of going through. And then in the second column is the year-to-date plus encumbrance. So that is what we've spent so far plus the reserved amount that's left still to spend on that budget item. Am I correct? Yep. And then the next column is the budget balance. So that's what's left in that line item. I'm just asking for my
Yes,
own
correct. Yep,
understanding and
yep.
clarification. So that next item, so if I'm on the first line, the staff salaries, the certified staff salaries, so then there's a balance, so that's what we have not yet spent? Or is that what's left over? Because isn't the encumbrance, isn't that added into the amount that we've spent so far? And that's, so if the first amount is what was budgeted for certified staff, and that's 22 million and change, then the second column is what we've spent so far plus what we have left still to spend, the encumbrance. So that says then there's $588,533 that we have sort of left that's like wiggle room. Is that correct?
Well, I won't say wiggle room, but I'll have Pauline explain with that, what's not encumbered to date. So those aren't salaries, but that money just hasn't been assigned yet. And so I'll have Pauline be a little more specific on where that 588 is going to.
Okay, because then there's a bigger one further down that I'm just curious about.
Okay, so encumbered means it's contractually obligated, so all members of our CBAs, so our certified staff, our non-certified staff, their salary would be encumbered as well as their benefits for the entire year. The $588,000 or $926,000 is unspent as of the day that this was gathered, which I believe was the 27th. So unspent means specifically substitutes. It could be athletic officials. It could be not contracted for.
So is that a normal amount for this time of year?
That's a very, yes. Yes.
Okay, so then going down to the benefits one,
Mhm.
that there's $2,400,000 in the health, dental, life column.
So that would be what we owe for our retirees, and it's not encumbered, but it is spoken for.
Okay, all right. So that clears that up for me, because I'm looking at this kind of with new eyes and trying to understand if we have $5,644,164. That seems like a lot, but that is a typical amount to have in the budget balance for this time of year.
That's a very conservative amount to have at this time of year. Generally, we would be in the $7 to $8 million range.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you for that. Next, we're going to jump right into what you'll see is the next page of the packet, which has been distributed. I'm going to walk through line by line. I'm going to shift my location over here and put the information up on the screen. So excuse me one. So as I've begun, I think the first place to start is to understand what our future obligations are in the eyes of our school committee and administration relating to maintaining existing programs and current investments. So it's a broad statement budgeting-wise, but it's a number that, at my request, was put together by the school department to look at what our current obligations are, both in technology and programs, and look at maintaining those, because, well, ideally, as many parents might want, we want to make more investments. But I think before we start talking about making more investments and some of the successes we've had in our school department, we need to talk about first, can we maintain what we've already built? So the school department has put forth these projections, starting at $54 million approximately in this year's budget. And to maintain the investments, as I said, by the school year 2020-2021, we see a necessary growth of up to $59.5 million. So I'm sure many have questions as far as what's in that number. And the goal tonight is to, I think, understand generally what's in that number, but not to peel it apart. My understanding is, in general, there's certain contractual obligations that have built-in increases. Actually, maybe I can ask our superintendent to give some upper-level, big-picture sort of ideas as far as how you came up with that number.
Sure, as you alluded to, it's, what we have is our approved budget, and with our contractual obligations for the next 3 years, especially with our certified staff. We calculated the salaries and benefits for the next 3 years and rolled that over, and then for, referring back to the sheet you had earlier, looking at the intermediate level, we looked at some of our 5-year comps and made a conservative estimate of what those numbers would be going forward. So that's where, again, it's a ballpark number on these numbers going forward. So it's, again, as Mr. Tiska said earlier, it's a very coarse, in a brief overview of, high-level overview of these numbers going forward. So it's not down to the penny, but it's a general trend over the next 3 years.
Thank you. The next line is state aid. So the first bite at funding what we need for our educational system. And we are in the midst of a planned state aid reduction over a period of years, which culminates in full transition in the year 2021, I believe, or thereabouts. So these numbers, which start at $14 million for this school year and are reduced down to an estimated $12.5 million in the year 2021, are numbers that are revised from time to time, but in general, this is the direction we're headed. The numbers are current. The numbers are as presented a couple weeks ago from the Department of Education, and most notably, the number for next year shows a reduction of nearly $900,000 in state aid to our school budget. So you have a growing budget and decreasing state aid, which leaves the remainder to be fulfilled by local contributions. So this budget year, local contribution combined between Bristol and Warren is about $36 million. And somewhat simple math gets you close to what will be needed in 3 years, which is closer to $44 million. So you can see that we have an $8 million delta or difference in, over the 8-year period of time that we need to anticipate and start having a conversation about how we address. So the next page pulled forward that last line to talk about how that's distributed between both communities. So, the town of Warren currently allocates approximately $10.5 million towards our education system. And over the next 3 years, with the current projections, would be asked to fund a 23% increase in the contributions, another $2.5 million, approximately $900,000 next year, $750 the following year, and another $750 the following year. So Bristol's contribution is this year approximately $25.5 million. And percentage-wise, seeing the same increases as the town of Warren, will see an equivalent 23% increase on their base to approximately $5.5 million, or $6 million. So, as I mentioned earlier, the goal this evening isn't to figure out how to come up with a combined $8 million. What I hope is to talk about where there may be opportunities to, over the next several months, discuss ways where we can close this. First, identify the gap, and then close this gap. In years past, it's been unusual to meet this early as a committee. Usually we meet in March for 1 or 2 meetings where we very quickly vote on a budget with not much time to consider all of the impacts. So this meeting, I hope, will allow us time to consider really where there are ways to get engaged and involved, to consider what the next steps forward are. First, the budget set by the school department and school committee. I think in light of these numbers, I think there needs to be consideration on what can be done to help narrow these diverging lines. I think from the state aid point of view, I think it's reasonable to think that maybe there's a conversation that could be had at the state level, a conversation that could help stabilize or minimize the continued reduction of state aid. So I think, first backing up to the school department level, I think there's opportunity in the budgeting process for the public to get engaged, but also us as town councilors and residents. I think from the state aid point of view, I think that there's opportunities for the councils to reach out to their legislators to talk about what kind of strategies can be implemented. Finally, I think that there's opportunity after those discussions to come back to the JFC and really identify what that gap is and come up with a strategy to close that gap. What I did leave out is a discussion at the town level, both at Bristol and Warren, town council and administration levels, to identify what can the towns really fund, provide for funding for education within the current taxing structure. What increases may be necessary to fund it? Is it even possible to increase taxes to get close to fulfilling this gap? So I think those are questions that could maybe not necessarily be answered at the JFC setting, but could be looked at, discussed at the town level, and brought back to the JFC for consideration, so that in March, when we are presented with the budget from the school committee, you can, in a fully informed manner, understand what the constraints are and what the desires are to continue to provide a high-performing school district. So with that, I'd like to offer discussion amongst the JFC on these numbers and some of their thoughts. I'd also like to provide an opportunity for the public to comment on the agenda this evening and talk about ways we can move forward.
Mr. Chairman, I think that what's ahead of us is definitely going to take 4 parties' participation, the school, the state, as well as the two towns, without having any time to reflect other than the amount of time I've had to look at these numbers, it's clear that we're going to have to cut town budgets in order to make this happen, or come in a partnership with the school committee cutting its budget. But I can clearly understand the one difficult task would be trying to project an increased revenue line that would cover these kind of numbers. $5 million in 3 years is not something that a town can make more widgets and sell. We can't try to be that much more streamlined in our productivity to come up with those kind of numbers. So I think that Mr. Tiska has brought the task straight ahead of us, and it's definitely going to involve the state and the two towns, as well as the school system, to figure out. I applaud his ability to bring this straight ahead and not have us deal with it down the road, because these are the kind of numbers that are going to come from cutting budgets. And I'm going to participate in the process and try to do the best that we can. And if you are looking for motions, I will entertain your thoughts and put them into the proper form when the time comes. I am in agreement.
Mr. Chairman, first, I'd like to thank the audience and everyone who came out tonight. This is such a great turnout to get involved, and as the Joint Finance Committee, from the past, we know the importance of taking the time to have more meetings, to have this constructive dialogue for the projections until we wait for March and the budgets. What's difficult that we keep talking about all the time is I hear my colleagues, we sit here as Joint Finance Committee members, but we also have municipal budgets. And the time frame by state law, we always get into that time frame of when we're trying to have those discussions to get to that end result. First, I'd like to recognize Town Councilman John Hanley, and speaking of the state, Representative Ken Marshall in the audience, because when we talk about the state, even at our council level, I'm just a realist, and I'll say it right in front of the rep and to the rest of the reps and senators, that this won't get resolved this year in session. It'll actually take a couple of years. So we know the variables that we use when it comes to the state formula. When it comes to these projections, and we talk about what we often do, I guess my question would be to the school department, when we talk about minimizing the school budget, are these projections from, just for my own curiosity, when you talk about contractual numbers, you know, with the staff and whatnot, I would also think it includes the OPEB liabilities, and we work so hard on our buildings because obviously we need to keep the doors open for our children to give that great education. So there's a capital plan that's involved with that, and I'm a big advocate for that because we need to keep our infrastructure for our schools and our children safe in comparison to the state and nationwide, especially with the building program that just got promoted by the governor. So these projections, just not hard numbers, Pauline, is just standard of what we have to anticipate, and anything on your end of minimizing would be on other sections of the school budget. And then that would be the same with the town. And again, just talking reality, whether it be Warren or Bristol, when we go into our budget to meet just the projections that just to maintain what we have, the cuts are going to be crucial and they're going to be bearing. And that's our task. That's why we're here and we're taking the responsibility. But I'm glad that we're having the conversation openly with the public and the school department and ourselves to really be prepared for when the budget time comes. So.
I would just say that, you know, we really have to do some looking, and everybody's going to have to economize. I mean, I think an $8.2 million increase in 3 years sounds very, very, very high amount to me. And I'm not sure how that compares, and I'd like to see some of those figures to other, you know, take another 3-year period, other communities, because that just seems an awful lot of money for such a short period of time. And so I think we're all going to have to look at that. I think it's almost impossible to say that any one of our towns, particularly Bristol, could come up with almost $6 million in the next couple of years, just on the school side and not on the municipal side, included, and that would be possible without state assistance. I mean, I think that this issue comes down, in my opinion, to the state getting more involved in either giving back the regional bonus or something else, because this has been dumped on us to try to fix this. And I think the communities have done as best a job as they can, a good job, because they have a good school district, but we can't absorb all of this. I know that in theory, like if you sit there and they do throw all the tax and stuff, and you have taxing ability, and they'll go through all these numbers. I've sat through those meetings before at the state level, and they'll say, you have capacity in Bristol to do more taxing. But they don't take into account all the people who are trying to maintain their homes and the diversity of people that are there. So I think that a lot of this issue could be solved. It needs to be solved at the legislative level. And I'm not trying to put that on the legislators, but I was there for 12 years, and I understand this issue. I've served on committees that have looked at funding formulas in the past, and I think that's where we really need to be advocates, because we're not going to find it here. And if we do, at what expense? Do we not have police? Do we not have whatever? Do we not have plowing? Do we not have whatever? So I think there's some serious issues. So that's just my thoughts right now, just looking at this, which at this point in time. And this is in a vacuum, obviously, also, because, one, I imagine if somebody said to me, Mary, can you do a 3-year projection for your project? I would make sure I include everything that I possibly ever want in that projection. So I think that's not the basics. And it is in the context of not looking at or knowing any other stuff on the municipal side that also has to get done. And it's not always things that we even necessarily want to do, but the federal government is bearing down on us, and the state government is bearing down on us and making us do other certain things. I think people have to understand this within a context. So, thank you.
Sure.
Ms. Silva and Ms. Dr. Andrade, we knew of the transitional decrease, the reduction over the 9-year period. Was there a change recently to the RIDE formula that actually came as a bit of a surprise?
So in your packet that you received, we'll go back to 2012, and you remember the slides that we used back in 2012, that was going to be $808,000 a year for the next 10 years. That was the slides we used, and we kind of continue to use year after year. Fortunately, or up until this past year, it wasn't $800,000. It was closer to $500,000 or $600,000 of a reduction in state aid due to the transition over time and some adjustments. This past year, the numbers we received was a shift. Last year, there was a reduction of about $500,000 in state aid. Next year is going to be $900,000. So we asked for justification from the Department of Education. They came back running the numbers again and said, based on the recent demographics and property value, that both towns could contribute more according to their formulas, and hence is the $900,000 reduction. So it hasn't been a surprise on that we were going to be reduced. It's actually been lower than projected, but next year it goes back up to the $900,000. So that's a big swing from $500,000 reduction to the $900,000 reduction. And then in the packet too, that you see that the 4-year projection is still pretty significant, $500,000-$600,000 going forward, which I think it'll be adjusted. So I don't know if that helps. And while my mic's open, I just want to be, it said we're including everything in our budget going forward. So we've been really conservative, knowing the towns that this is a really big number. So number from 54 million to next year to $56 million is a .04 increase. So again, I think we're trying to be really conservative. I think you know from us, from the district side, I am very committed to transforming the school to make it the best, not only in Rhode Island, but New England within this budget. We will cut where we think there's places to cut and eliminate and reinvest. So this money is just reinvestment into things that are working and eliminating programs that are not, based on action research, based on our data. But this is rolling over our current staffing, the number of teachers that we have in front of our students, the number of Council 94 members. This is just a basic staffing requirement, our contractual obligations. But I want the JFC and our audience to know, even though this is a rolling over our budget, we will be innovative. We will be a high-performing district. We will make it happen within these numbers, and the school department is committed to the transformation within a .04 increase.
Mr. Superintendent, speaking of the Rhode Island Department of Education, on their adjustments in their assessments, Pauline, that you forwarded to us, just to be clear, those are state mandates. Am I correct?
State mandates?
Yeah.
On their formulas?
Yes.
That's their calculations. We control nothing that RIDE,
So,
they give us that number.
so again, the reason why I'm revisiting is when you come up with calculations and the formulas and the adjustments and the argument, because I've had arguments with RIDE, in my own opinion, that's where really it has to be addressed. As Councilwoman Perella said, it's those places that, you know, in conjunction with the state and the Department of Education, for certain municipalities that really have to identify their stance and their needs going forward. So it's not only a budgeting process, it's what we're trying to actually prove on our defense of what we're dealing with, and, you know, how those changes affected us and how their adjustments are really out of scope, so.
So, again, in summary, there's three buckets, in essence. First bucket is the school department's budget, and that bucket can be changed by the priorities and the way in which the budget is managed. And I think the superintendent has clarified what his priorities are in continuing to innovate within what I think is a incredibly modest increase. The second bucket is state aid, and we've heard a couple ideas as far as the flexibility there. I think that this body, JFC, isn't the body to develop that strategy, to work with our legislators, to come up with, whether it's a reprioritization, recalculation. That's something that can be done at the town council level. The final bucket is what's left over for the towns, and that's something that is really just a calculation. So I think it's important we look at ways that we can take action tonight to find out more refined, maybe better number that can be managed by the towns. And I think at the same time, we need to see how far away is that from what the towns can afford. So for example, if the towns, via their municipal budget, over the next 3 years, in a course projection can see a $1 million increase to funding schools, well, pretty far away, but I think that can aid in the dialogue with the state to identify exactly where we need to be to meet the goals of the school department. So with that, I'd like to provide an opportunity for those who attended tonight to, unless my fellow committee members have any other comments or questions, I'd like to provide an opportunity for members of the public, those who have attended tonight, to ask questions, do our best to answer them, or provide any comments far as input on strategies that we can implement going forward to help close this, first identify and then secondly close the gap.
Member of the Warren Town Council, and I don't have that whole packet, I just got this sheet that was passed out. And just doing the numbers quick in my head, the state aid looks like it's gonna be reduced by roughly 1.6 million. However, the school budget is going up close to 5.1. So even if the state, we get them to hold their funding steady, we're still 3.1, 3.2 mil in the hole in 3 years. So, you know, there's a lot of talk about state aid here, but that's the smallest piece of the puzzle. The biggest piece of the puzzle would actually be the budget. So unless we can get the state to increase the aid, even if they hold it steady with these numbers, we're still $3.1 million in 2020 and 2021 in the hole. So I would put a focus on hopefully getting the state to increase the aid, not just hold it steady. Because if they just hold it steady, we still got the same problem. Thanks.
Thank you.
My name is Tony Cabral. I'm just a citizen. I'm looking at the numbers. They don't jive for me. I'm looking at the approved budget, and I'm looking at 35.9 million for Bristol and Warren, 14.2 for state aid, and 54.3 for the total budget. What's the difference between those numbers? They don't add, the state aid and the Bristol Warren contribution don't add up to the 54.3.
You're correct, yep. And we anticipated this question. I thought maybe, Pauline, you're best to address
So
that.
there's aid, called categorical aid, that's outside of the funding formula. That's about 1.1 million as well. There's miscellaneous revenues, including interest on investments, tuition, prior period reimbursements, that's a Medicaid reimbursement. That's about another 800,000 on a good year. It's other revenues that are coming in, yeah.
Yeah, so I put together these numbers, and my comprehension of that level of detail maybe not be fully up to speed, and what I try to do is focus on the big numbers, and I think that, Yep, and I think
Mr. Chair.
big numbers and trends.
Mr. Chair, may I suggest if you could hit the button on your microphone, so,
Oh,
thank
I'm
you.
sorry.
It goes off after a couple minutes, that's all.
yeah, and I agree it is a big number, and I think what I can promise you is that at a subsequent meeting, as we continue to refine the accuracy of some of these numbers and the reality of them, that will continue to include all of the relative line items, maybe not called out necessarily, but maybe lumped with some of the other big numbers. So I appreciate your attention to that detail.
Okay, thank you.
I think he makes a good point from a public perspective, because we sit and we ask Pauline questions and whatnot, but when you talk about big numbers and if there's you have to decipher where the aid's coming from, there should be a line item for the residents if you want them to really participate and really know what might be those outliers. Maybe we can have some clarity going forward.
I mean, it's almost $4 million, that's the difference. So it's not like a small amount, even if it just says other.
Yes, my name is Bart Ferris, resident of Bristol. I do have a question. You said the state came back and told you that we could be taxed more, or, okay, do they give recommendations of how much? I mean, is it just this blind feedback? Because, I mean, I know I've seen, I think it was maybe a year ago, I'm looking at a report in the paper from, I think it was either Cranston or Warwick, where they were being taxed somewhere above $20 a thousand of assessed value. And I know we're much lower than that, which is great, but I'm just kind of curious as to where the state feels like we would be on par. And then I look at proportions of the tax revenues that are brought into this town compared to other communities. And the only one I've just heard about was like Barrington, which was something like 90% versus our like 50%. And I'm round numbers. So I'm just kind of curious as to where all that falls out, because I feel like we're talking about going to the state to get money, and I feel like that well is pretty dry. I don't know, so I look at it and I say, what kind of schools do we want to have? Where do we want these to go, right? The first question that gets asked when we moved here 16 years ago, the first question that got asked was, how are the schools, right? Everybody talks about it. Any business comes into town, any person moves into town, the first thing they ask, how are the schools, right? I can't tell you how many people I know that, what do you do? Oh, I moved to Barrington, or I live in Barrington, or I just had kids, so I'm going to Barrington. And then kids go away. It's amazing. All of a sudden, they come back to Bristol, okay? Yet now we have some of the best schools in the state. I'm very proud of what we're doing. But I am concerned because I don't think this is going to go away. And I am curious if we are really spending the money we need to be spending to get, to keep this where it's going, right? To keep the school system where it's going. And are we really contributing enough? I've got friends that live in some of the best communities up around Boston, Shrewsbury, whatever. They're loading up their BMWs with their sacks of trash to take it to the dump. Now, granted, that's not what I want to be doing, and I don't have a BMW. But it does concern me, right? When we're kind of, oh, well, do we have enough of this? Do we have enough of that? Have we really dug deep enough? And I think this came up last year. I think Paul Silva may have brought it up. I'm not sure who, about the amount of increases we've done to the, municipal budget, the non-school budget, versus what we've done with the school budget. And it was pretty stark, the amount of increases we've had there over the last, 9 years versus what we've done with the school budget. Because, hey, we'll just crank that down, right? I don't know if it's a voting issue. I don't know if it's a constituency issue, right, of the voters. But it is very concerning. And if we want to keep a very dynamic community, and kids that go to our schools are going to be coming up and be voters. They're going to be residents. And they're going to see what we do, right? How we invest in them, right? I know these are hard decisions, but are they going to be more excited about their community because they have a great sports team, they have a great band, or because they got an extra plow? An extra plow, an extra snow plow, an extra what, right? You know what I'm saying? So it's just, where are we putting our investments, not only today, but for the future? And how does that drive people to our community? Thank you.
Well, certainly, Mr. Ferris, that's why the discussion, we all can be in this cafeteria here tonight and be accountable. But like you said, it takes more than just going to the state legislation. It's the discussions with the Rhode Island Department of Education, their analysis, their data. Those are the real numbers that we have to pay attention and justify how they come to these conclusions, because that's what impacts and directs where we're going, and we see these cuts. So we have to identify everybody, and when we bring everybody to the table, everybody has to be at the table, and we have to be paying attention to those numbers. So
I think it's been a long time since I participated in those discussions, but I believe it's the Department of Administration or Division of Taxation that does that tax capacity. Am I correct? I don't believe that comes from the Department of Ed. I'm not sure. All of them, yeah. But I mean, I think that, you know, we've had these discussions before, and I think everybody wants good schools and the best schools that you can have, but you have to be able to, people have to be able to afford to live here. So, I mean, I remember meetings, and I'm sure many of you were at them, where people said, we don't need to have snow plowed as often as we do. We don't need to bring our trash, we can all bring it. I mean, Portsmouth, we don't have to look to Shrewsbury, we can look to Portsmouth. They bring their trash to the transfer station. And so there's as many people who would fight against those issues as well. And I think that it's, I take a little bit of exception because I think we've worked very, very, very hard to be fair and equitable to everyone, to say that it's all a voting issue. No, it's not. It's like, what's affordable? You talk about your kids getting a great education, yes. Will they be able to come back here to live? Because if every house costs $600,000, $700,000, $800,000, like some of the places that you're talking about, that may not be doable. Not if you're going to work in social services, not if you want to be a police officer, not if you want to be a school teacher. This is not going to be a place that your kids will be able to come back and live. So, I mean, that's the other part of the equation that we all have to be cognizant of, I think.
I don't think that tonight is the forum for that level of discussion. I think that those discussions I welcome as the council president to have at our budget meetings as the town council. I think that tonight the information that's being presented is proper. We are the JFC, but the actions and the discussions that are going to produce the result is going to be at the council level. So I hear you loud and clear, and I just want to remind everybody that we are in a dual. I'm here, but I'm also here tonight as a JFC member, and it's when I create the town budget that I'll be a council member. And I want to hope that we're not sending the wrong message to everyone, also with the studies that are going on as well. Although the discussion has entertained the deregionalization, I'm one who believes that that information will provide once and for all that if we can't afford what's in front of us now, it'll show scientifically that we can't afford to be in this alone. Because for the 10 or 12 million that we're giving and the 25 million that Bristol is giving, we have a $55 million output. So that sounds like a pretty good business deal. We need to figure out how to come together as two communities and fund the system.
Well, I was hoping we can get through the meeting without talking about deregionalization, but regardless, I think my goal, the lines are blurred clearly, as you mentioned. We sit here as town councilors, but also members of the JFC committee. The lines are blurred, and so what I'd like to attempt to do is clarify those lines. And you know, I feel that the JFC is put into a position in the past over a short period of time to make a very important decision. And I'm hoping that the very discussion that Mr. Ferris started is a discussion that can happen in the context of each town council to understand what their abilities really are, what their will is to be able to look at the revenue that it allocates towards education. And upon each community doing that and blocking in a 3-year projection, we then as JFC can see where the constraints are, knowing that both communities have looked seriously at both sides of it, the cuts necessary to get there or the potential tax increases to get there. And as councils look at the positives and negatives of both. You know, at the same time, I hope that when the JFC meets next, it can take into account discussions that may have ensued in a preliminary fashion around the state aid. And I hope also that the next time we meet, we can have discussions around numbers which add up more clearly, I should say, and also around a budget which has given the school department more time to take into account things as they've changed. So.
Hi, my name is Brian Chittister. I am a teacher here at Mount Hope High School. I'm also the vice president of the Bristol Warren Education Association, the teachers union. I'm a parent in Warren, and I've taught here for 17 years and lived here for 13. And I was very curious to see what this would be like tonight, given the process is starting so early. And to be honest, pretty much from the moment Mr. Tiska was done giving the opening presentation, I've been extremely disappointed. And I think what we've heard is basically, well, we can't do this, we can't do this, we have to make cuts, we can't do this. There's one thing that you people could do tonight, which is change your attitude. Because it's obvious to me, and I think it's obvious to a lot of people in this audience, that the schools are simply not your priority. And if there's any way you're going to have productive discussions at the town council level, then the schools have to be your priority. So I would like to see you change that to begin with. And Councilwoman Farrella, I have to take issue with your assertion that the towns have done a good job funding the schools, because let's be honest. And I don't see Mr. Silva here tonight. He must be tired of sounding like a broken record, because I think he was the one who brought up back in March that actually in the last 12 years, the Joint Finance Committee has not once approved the entire budget request of the Bristol Warren Regional School District. Furthermore, the Bristol Warren Regional School District has not once even asked for a waiver of the PIVA weed restriction on how much taxes can be raised at the local level. So the school committee comes with a modest request and gets docked, even as it is. Having been to these meetings, almost all of them over the last 12 years, I have to say, I think that the budget number that is presented has actually been almost the same in absolute terms over a decade. And so the increases that are projected, and I don't know, I'm not a financial person, but the increases that are projected seem to me like they actually would flow with the rate of inflation, the rate of costs that go up. And to hear people, I understand, yes, the state is a problem, absolutely. They've been cutting aid to towns since the early 1990s. I would like to see that change, but I'd also like to see people stop kicking the can down the road. And I think you people need to change your outlook if this whole process is going to be in any way, shape, or form productive. And by the way, just on that last note, I would also state that if anybody thinks that deregionalization is a good idea, I don't know what's wrong with their head. I think, honestly, we probably need to look to larger solutions and larger regionalizations if we're going to handle this crisis. But for the immediate moment, I would like to see a change in the attitude of this committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. I know this is being recorded. I would just like to know what comment I made tonight that I said that I'm not willing to fund something, because all my comments tonight are well, when you address somebody in your position, you should address it if it's going to be to some individual or the whole group as a joint finance committee.
Well, I'm sorry, just to respond, I mean, if I heard everyone correctly, it's clear that we're going to have to cut town budgets or get the schools to cut their budget. It's difficult to figure out new flows of revenue. I'm a realist, this won't get resolved this year. It's been dumped on us to fix this, and towns have done a good job funding the schools. The issue has to be resolved at the state level. I'm sorry, it's all kicking the can down the road.
I'm a realist that the state, we won't provide that at the state level in one session. I did make that, when you said realist, I think I used that word tonight. But I will not sit here, because you talk about attitudes. We're being very respectful every budget session, and we take into consideration. So I just found it a little offensive.
Okay. I'm sorry we disagree.
Could I just ask a quick question? Did you say you were the union president?
The vice president, yes.
Vice president? And one thing that I wanted to just ask Pauline, so I can ask you, what are the contractual obligations for the next several years as far as raises are concerned? Both for the union both for the teachers union and the non-certified union?
275, 26, and 26.
I'd like to add to this that those raises came along with increases in what the teachers are paying to healthcare. They came along with other cuts that teachers took on our side. So a 275 raise, I know, and I just want to clarify, a 275 raise is not actually as much as it may sound. And I'd also just like to remind everyone in the audience that for 4 years in a row, from 2010 to 13, am I about right? We took 0% raises for 4 years in a row. So it's not as though what we are asking in terms of salaries, benefits, and so forth is outside the realm of what is reasonable. If anything, we look at where are teachers in the state, and one other thing, and we aim for about about the middle. And the other thing that I'd like to say is that our statewide union, the National Education Association of Rhode Island, has been advocating for a while for there to be a statewide level contract for salaries and benefits so that the financial questions could be taken care of by the state and not by the locals. So I do want to put that out there so that you understand some of my perspective, which is that I agree that it shouldn't all be on the towns. I just want to express my disappointment that I feel like every time we come here, the immediate message, even if you don't say it directly, but the immediate message seems to be the schools are not really our priority, you need to cut. That's my disappointment.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr.
I'd like to bring, I'd like,
Non-certified union is?
We're negotiating, we'll be negotiating right now,
Oh,
but
you are
just.
now? So that's my
Yeah, so that'll be going forward, you know, as we go. But I just want to echo some of Mr. Chides's comments. So it is 2.75 moving forward. There was some major concessions in other areas of the contract. So the average teacher is making about, will earn an extra $800 next year in their pocket. So roughly about $5 a day in their contract.
thank you. Mr. Labonte.
Hi, my name is Paul Labonte. Most of the membership in the committee has changed since I've last spoken to this group, but I would like to encourage the committee to take some time and go back through minutes so that you can review the presentation that was done for the committee in 2012. The committee at that time impaneled a task force that spent a fair amount of time putting together recommendations to bring forward to address, quite frankly, every issue that we've talked about tonight. And unfortunately, none of those recommendations were ever taken or nor acted on. And I think it would be a good place to start if the committee is interested in trying to take this on at this time. I don't want to speak to any of the details of it. It was quite a few years ago, and I wouldn't want to misspeak on that. But what you will find in the minutes that came out of that task force were analysis that was done and taken to a deeper level based on the Department of Ed and what the funding formula was doing and what the planning around that was, why they were making some of the decisions they were making, and so forth. So I think I'm going to leave it at that, but if those minutes are unavailable, I would be disappointed. I was the chairman of that committee. It would probably be inappropriate to introduce those formally again, but I did keep copies, obviously, and still have them available. So there's the individual presentation, but there was quite a few other documents and minutes submitted over time. Thank you.
Joanne, please.
I'm Joanne DeVoe, resident of Warren, and I too was curious about the contractual obligations. Is it one teachers union? Do you have other unions that you negotiate with? And are these usually annual contracts or multi-year?
We have.
So the Council 94 is our non-certified staff. We're going into negotiations with them after the first of the year. Currently, a CBA, collective bargaining agreement, is a 3-year contract.
Okay.
And what I wanted to add before I was cut off last time was that the wage increase did come with a substantial benefit concession.
And the teacher contract is also 3 years?
Yes, ma'am.
I see. So we're just starting that 3-year process now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. DeVoe. Is there anyone else that would like to, yes?
I would just like to state that when I spoke about cutting the $900,000 that's needed, I would love your creativity at a budget meeting, but it is not a negative to say that if this is the amount of money that the town of Warren needs to provide the system, right now, I can only give you one way for me to create $900,000. That would be removing $900,000 from the budget. Once that's done, I now have a $1.8 million that I need to make up if I want to bring back the $900,000. So it's very good, and I respect you, and I don't think you disrespected me at all. I'll vote for you when you run for my seat. I'll pay to go to your fundraiser. All I'm stating is, you can be negative if you sit here. You also can be understanding of the process. And when we take a dollar, if we want to put that dollar back, it's $2. So this is not something I take lightly. It's not something that I'm encouraging the school committee to cut. But I am with the chair in regards to why we're having this meeting this early. And it's because we know what we need to do. And if we don't work together, we're going to have a situation of massive problems. It's a money issue. And the sad reality is, I haven't met that many people that really welcome a massive increase in taxes. And again, to set the record straight, we did go over the 4% cap, and it was when we cut the 1.6 million that was needed. I've been there, I've made the motions, I'm not afraid, I don't do it because of votes. So when this needs to be done, it'll be done because it's a responsibility that I hold, I will do, and you have my word that we will try to keep the schools as well as they can be and as funded as fully as we can.
Thank you. No other comments from the public? Any other thoughts from the committee members this evening?
Well, I guess my tone, if I came off, you know, a little irate, it's just because when you talk about attitude, you know, each of us that sit here, I used to negotiate municipal contracts. I represented union members like yourself, so I know both sides. But sitting up here as a joint finance committee, it's frustrating because we know the plight that is in front of us, and every year, like you said, what we're trying to do and what we're trying to address. And I think tonight, with the projections and whatnot, I know you say year after year, but as President DePasquale said, this is our job. I'm not going to say it's not an easy task because it's a task that has to be addressed with all of us. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Councilman. Okay. With that, I'd like to entertain any motions or proposed actions that we can take prior to our next meeting, which we'll try to set during the next agenda item. So
I'd like to make a motion that the JFC ask the Bristol Warren Regional School District School Committee and Administration to further study and adjust their projections for the next 3 years in a manner which is simplified for public engagement and respectful of the anticipated financial challenges. I think what we've heard tonight is sometimes it's difficult to understand exactly what's being presented. So if we could do that, I think that would be helpful. And that's a motion.
the motion, is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, ayes have it.
I make another motion that the JFC forward the numbers presented this evening to both the Bristol and Warren Town Councils and administrations and request that they reply with their corresponding 3-year projections for what they are both able and willing to provide for education. Time frame, I think, would probably be, I'll leave it open-ended. I believe that right now, to put a time frame on it could be unrealistic from this perspective. I don't exactly know where our treasurers and administration are dealing in their budget. I don't think this will fall through the cracks.
Okay, so we have a motion, do we have a second?
I'll second for discussion. President DePasquale, the only wording that I see here that, and I'm gonna speak from a joint finance committee member, but it's hard sometimes, is when the word projections, 3-year projections, the schools have a capital budget, municipalities have a capital budget, and it's ever changing. It changes all the time, and that's why we go through budgets every year, whether it be certain line items or whatnot. I'm just not comfortable on, the answer from any council, whether Bristol, Warren, and the administration, that we reply in that type of projection. I guess I'm just questioning the motion of, I need some clarity of what you're trying to accomplish with the motion.
When I look at projections, I know that, for example, if a police contract had just started, it's the first year of a 3-year contract, you'd be able to understand those numbers. That would be a constant. If your steelworkers union had just negotiated. So when you look for discussion purposes only, potential position on where you may be, I think that our treasurers and administration would be able to tell you, for discussion only, where we would be. If we couldn't, I don't know how we would be able to be doing what we're doing. I understand that when we actually sit down, sure, it changes, but you could give a projection on no change. So if you looked at 3 years from now with no change, where we would be. If you would look at the increases, where we would be. That's all I'm coming from.
No, I understand, but both able and willing, obviously we have the will, whether it be whatever budget item we're talking about, it's the able. I'm just wondering what type of response is the Joint Finance Committee expecting from the councils and the administration?
Well, it seems, for discussion that, that process, through discussions at the town councils, meetings and administrations would involve some public engagement. And I think that as the towns put together similar projections of what is known, obviously you can't predict everything of the future, but what is known, I think it would help identify also priorities. I think as you continue to forecast for 3 years, gives you an opportunity to fill in some blanks years ahead on whether the towns have a strategy of continuing to allocate the same amount every year, whether the towns will work to strategically increase over a period of years, understanding what the other projections are telling us. And I think it's an opportunity more for planning than for commitment, I think is what the motion seems to intend.
I think that we certainly have that in our capital plan. We have like a 5 years and out, longer than that. I think that it can be done department by department in terms of staff. And so when you think about education is a very labor-driven, business. You have to have teachers in front of the kids. We have and everybody has variables. So you look at, for example, the car tax. Look at the car tax issue that was unfolding as we were going along. We never know when we're doing our budget. Everything's a moving target. Were they going to pass it? Were they not going to pass it? What about the transfer station? It doesn't really matter who brings the trash to the transfer station, but getting it up to Johnston and paying the tipping fees, which are going to, or are doubling, or getting close to substantially increasing, that's all things that we're trying to work on. And those are always moving targets. So, I think we can project, what will be the cost of the contracts for the police, the contracts for the, town hall employees, et cetera, department by department. But I think it's going to be a little trickier to figure out exactly what we're going to be spending on, because some of those things we just don't know. And we may not know it. We may find ourselves, I remember being on the council, and I don't know if, my current colleagues were there or not, when they originally had the car phase out. I don't think they were there yet. They originally had the car phase out, this was going on for years and years. And then just in January, the state ran out of money and said, guess what, guys, you're not going to get your money. And the town had to figure it out. Well, fortunately, we were able to say, okay, well, we're not going to bank on that next year. But, that is that's the reality of what happens to us. I think that happens on the municipal side far more than it would happen on a school side.
And I think part of the process that you described is when laid out over a 3-year period, you can identify pretty quickly what those effects are long-term. So when there is a change in the car tax, for example, I think that effect on years to come, as as the 3-year projections are used as a guide, the effect could be understood, and you can plan accordingly related to what the requirements are for education. So I think more of it as a tool.
We can provide some projections. The accuracy will be questionable, but to take it for face value and accept it similar to what we have here, yeah, we can do it. This study used salaries, benefits, and 5-year comps. We can certainly do that. And we also provide a report to the Department of Revenue, so we can provide a report. But it is subject to changes. Like Councilwoman Perella said, there are a number of issues. The water company may elect not to provide the pilot program payment. There are a number of issues that could come up, and things may change, but we certainly can provide you the information.
So it sounds like it's something that you may be already doing or contemplating. It's a matter of maybe ensuing a broader discussion and sharing the information in a clear way, too.
That's why I have a concern about it, because you put it on paper and somebody's going to come back and say, well, you guys projected this, so now you can spend more money on education or on fire, whatever the issue may be, when in reality, that's not taking everything into consideration. And so, I mean, I think that, I mean, I'm very, very sure that Steve and our treasurer, Julie, I'm sure Julie has looked at these projections out. I'm sure she knows exactly what those contracts are going to cost us in 5 years, you know, whatever the length of the contract is. So that's not hard to do. It's just, people have to understand, if it's out there, what that is. And people also have to participate in the budget process. I mean, like, you know, we have 0 people who show up at our budget process. You know, we have maybe 1 or 2 people. I mean, I think the most telling photo in the Bristol Phoenix of the last several years was the picture of the Colt school debate as to whether or not they should change the parade route, where people are screaming and yelling and everything, versus the picture of 2 people in the audience during the budget time. So, I mean, you know.
I agree now that for transparent purposes, the first motion was actually from the school department to adjust and study their projections for the next 3 years and provide them. I would just, if the President DePasquale is amenable to just ending the motion with that the JFC forward the numbers presented tonight to both the Bristol and Warren Town Councils and administrations, and request that they reply with their corresponding 3-year projections in respect of the anticipated financial challenges.
Well, the same wording, just basically.
We are being accountable, just as we're asking in the first motion, of the school department, so.
Sure. Just so the public knows, our treasurer in Warren, as well as our manager, is going to, we have a 3-year projection in front of us. It's from the schools. So the motion is a technicality. The action is going to be brought forth. We're going to look at this. We have to look at this. We have to understand where we're going to be. I'm amenable to whatever language would make this body's motion enacted, but just so the public knows, we're doing this. We're going to do this. We can't ignore this. It's our responsibility. So sure, I'll add whatever language you recommended. The anticipated financial challenges.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
So I think this is extremely appropriate. I think a 3-year projection is, in fact, the Administrator and I were just talking, we already do it. So the expectation, I think, is just the question, is not whether or not we should or could, and I absolutely think we should. The expectation is that it needs to be as high level as this is, with not necessarily wiggle room and a way to get out, but a reality-based number. That's all. So I think
I think that's where we're all kind of, not kind of tapping around, we are. We're all saying the same thing, is that let's be reasonable and realistic, but let's also put something that we can all put our hands on. And as we've just said, we're all doing it already. There's a 2014 quote by Donald Rumsfeld, the known knowns and the known unknowns, you know that whole thing? So some things we're just not going to know. Councilman Perrella brought out some great points, is there's going to be things that are going to go up. There's things that are going away, like the car tax. I mean, that sounds wonderful because I pay the car tax too, but money's got to come from someplace. So I think that this is a great next step. I think it's appropriate, and I just think we need to make sure that our expectations are realistic. That's all.
So we have a motion and a second amended motion, which is accepted. Call for a vote. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it. Diane is recording, and we're also... Thank you.
I will make another motion that the Joint Finance Committee request that the Bristol and Warren Town Councils, again, to be redundant with Mr. Levanti, councils begin conversations with their state legislators as to strategies to stabilize or minimize the reduction to state aid, but I would also like to add, and all state governmental agencies pertaining to education funding.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
2 seconds of discussion. Again, something we're already doing, which is, I think, is Rep Marshall here? I knew he was here. There he is. Probably on a week-to-week basis, this conversation. In fact, we spoke today, and I'm not the only one that calls Rep Marshall and others. But we have conversations. One that happened this morning is something that we talked about earlier. What if the aid stopped going away? It stopped where it is right now. What if we stopped the bleeding? Is that a doable thing? Can other communities get on board? It's 39 other communities, right? You have to have everybody. You have to have a majority to get these things passed. So I guess I say again, these things are happening, not only with me, other people that are sitting here, and probably a lot of you out there. You're speaking to them all the time. So I think this motion is absolutely appropriate, again, but I don't think it should be start. It's already happening. Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Stewart, could you please repeat your motion for me?
The Joint Finance Committee requests that the Bristol and Warren Town Councils begin conversations with their state legislators as to strategies to stabilize or minimize the reduction to state aid and involve all other state governmental agencies pertaining to education funding.
To Nathan's point, can we change begin to continue?
Continue. Yeah, I think there's a suggested amended motion which changes the word begin to continue. And we can help you with the language for the minutes as well to clarify that. So we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Thank you. Okay. Sure. Please come on up. Absolutely.
A more a housekeeping issue, I guess, if you, my name is Nina Murphy. I'm a Bristol resident, Bristol parent. You know, our children are in the district. I guess my question is going forward. I would suggest, I mean, to Mary's point, you want people to show up at these meetings. We've shown up. And it feels, just the layout, that maybe if we could have, you know, people meet at tables. I'm curious how you want us to contribute to this conversation. I think we all have ideas that we've looked at these budgets over the years and think, oh, can we do without, I don't know, books and transportation to children who don't go to our district? You know, is that something? You know, that comes to mind. What about transportation costs? What are you looking from us to contribute to this conversation going forward? And to drill it down, because we're in the schools, we're constantly in our schools. We are seeing exciting things. You come to this school on a Friday night, you can't even park your car. You've got every sport, you've got sports, music, you know, lots of things like that we are all passionate about. But we can appreciate when you're sitting on the town council, you're wearing a different seat and hat, I should say. So I'm looking to you to communicate to this group who've come out tonight, who've been encouraged to come, who've left children elsewhere, who've thrown the dishes, are still on the table, but we're here and we want to contribute because we want to see funding for our schools going forward. So you tell us what you'd like.
Okay, thank you. And I think, thank you. There's a couple ways, and this is one way. Two other ways, school department budget. So the type of questions that how the school allocates their dollars, how they prioritize initiatives and programs. Being involved and aware of the school department's budget process is important. One of the motions we made was encouraging the school department to possibly simplify a little bit. The chart of accounts and the budgeting process for the school department is complex. The revenue streams are complex, the obligations are complex. So I'm hoping that the school department can acknowledge what you said and allow and encourage ways to become more informed and more engaged in what's budgeted from the school department's point of view. Related to funding of their budget, as you mentioned, state aid, it's difficult for, I would imagine, for you to find a pathway to work with your state legislator, although it would be important for you to call him or her and let them know how important looking at a strategy to resolve this is, and to work with local town councils to come up with a resolution is important. So you can advocate to your state representatives. And finally, as Mary said, the municipal budgeting process. That's where priorities are set. That's where we decide both our capital budget long-term, but also the operational budget. That's where we decide. So the challenge has been in the past. Yep. Sure. Sure. I think I'm not going to be able to answer all of your questions tonight, but what I do promise to do is to work with my colleagues to understand, I think, some clear opportunities for you and others to communicate what you think the priorities for our community should be so that we can listen to you and plan accordingly. The purpose of tonight's meeting was to kick off this process. In the past, as I began, the process has been difficult to navigate for me as a newcomer too, because we're presented a budget from the school department very quickly in a short period of time to consider as a committee in concurrent with our municipal budget process. And so in some ways we're getting ahead, but not at the right time, if that makes sense, with the budgeting process. So I would like to say that over the next 2 months between now and our next meeting, which is something that we'll hopefully come up with tonight, we will be able to communicate additional ways for you to become engaged and involved and affect the process.
Can I say something about that? So a couple of things, just on your quick comment about the local budget. I mean, I would say over the last several years, especially with the recession, our town administrators have done a terrific job in negotiating everything down. It's very little change except those contractual obligations. And even some of the stuff that we used to do where we would, on a rotation of a cruisers, like, I shouldn't really say this since Steve is sitting here and you know it far better than I, but, you know, we were always like every year buying one or two, so you're always in a rotation and you're never like getting like in a mess with, you know, not having something working properly. That we have limited our capital budget to a few $100,000 a year, and we're having to set priorities as to what is in the worst shape over the years. So, I mean, we have, I think, cut back on a lot of things compared to the way that process used to be, where, you know, we've had administrators in the past, long history, where people would, you know, want to be the hero and say, I'm cutting taxes, and then the council had to restore everything because everything was cut to zero. You know what I mean? And so now you get these very realistic budgets where there's not a lot of wiggle room. I mean, I think they've done a very good job, but I mean, certainly everyone can come and question, like, well, why are you giving that extra sand? Like, because they, what Julie and our administrators have been doing, our town treasurer, is take the 5-year average, just as Pauline and Mario mentioned. What have we spent on snow, salt and sand in the last 5 years? We've looked at it and try to take like that average as to make our projections. So this whole idea that there's no projections, there are many projections out there. But what I want to really get to is the advocacy piece. And I want to bring that piece to the legislative end. And I know some of you think, well, the legislature, who cares? Well, I think there's a lot of things and a lot of other organizations that can advocate for us. And I'm saying this partly from my years of town government, but also from my years of just having to hustle money for my own programs at work. And I don't think there's enough out there where people are going out there. Now, I'm just going to brainstorm, so just take this for what it's worth at this point, because I haven't thought every one of these ideas through. For example, you go up in the last several years, if you spend any time in the State House, you'll see there are all these organizations that come and advocate for money all the time. And they'll do their Rhode Island Day, and you can get the clam cakes from South County or whatever you want to do. The Catholic schools and independent schools have gone to the State House in the last several years and really made a point, because there's been legislation to not have the textbook loan program. They have been out there, they have tables, they have all these students, they have everybody out, and they have been very effective in keeping the programs going. Okay, so when you talk about transportation to the out-of-district, placements, out of the private and parochial schools, you talk about the textbooks. I'm not making a comment as to whether or not we should do it or not. I'm just saying, because people would say, I pay taxes in Bristol, my kid goes to another school, I want those books. I'm simply saying that is like very effective advocacy, and they have done a great job just in a very short period of time. So what would happen if the regional school districts got together and did the same sort of thing? That's what I'm saying. It's like every one of you individually, but collectively, I see other issues, and just off the top of my head, I can't think of what it is, but I get very frustrated in my own job where I see things just spiraling. And I think every town has a little bit of a different rate for what you pay for retirement, for example, for non-certified teachers. At one point it was 18% of a person's salary. 18%. It's outrageous. The idea that you can't have a part-time worker without paying benefits over 20 hours. So I can't hire you. What I said to my version of Pauline is, why isn't Riasco fighting that battle and moving that up to 25 hours and helping us in the programs that we have in the schools to be able to do some of this? But I don't see any of that happening. And it all comes down to, well, you on the town has to find the money. But there's all these little pockets that if we really were going to be strategic about it, I think we could find things in there that people could collectively advocate for at the state level. So it may not be that in this climate, I'm sounding like getting like I'm agitated. I'm not agitated. I'm just like, this is like one of my favorite topics. It's the advocacy, so I'm sorry. But, we hear all about it. We all hear about the $50 million that's going out to, bring 1,000 jobs in. But if we're going to go there asking for education money, they're probably going to say we don't have any, because we already got a budget gap and all this stuff. That's what we see in the paper every day. But we have to go, step by step and figure out, what are some of those smaller things? Maybe they're not going to just give us $10 million, but maybe there's going to be all these little pieces that we can go and advocate for. So what have we done? I know Nathan, there has been some meetings of the regional districts, but what if the families and the parents, these really hit us the most, because we're the most, I think our two towns are most diverse, and one of the largest of the regional districts. We are in a little bit of our own situation, but how do we advocate collectively and bring the show and tell to the State House? Because that's where the action happens, and you just got to do it. And it gets boring, and it's long, and you got to sit there, and you've got parents leaving, and I've been there with the parents, and I'm like, thank God my parents didn't leave. Other communities did. And I was very proud of one of my students, adult students, who got up, and the chairman of the committee was being very nice, but they didn't want a long, lengthy explanation. And he says to her, when she takes a breath, she was an ESL student, a Delta ESL student, said, thank you very much, and she said, oh, I'm not finished yet. You know, and I'm like, good for her, and she's finished up. And you bring the kids, and they talk about the great things they're doing. I mean, there's a lot of strategies that a lot of people have used that make a difference. So I think we have to think about that as well, as just, not just how you advocate to us, but how do we advocate to the legislature, because it's not going to be just on Kenny. You know, like, even though he's very powerful and, like, close to the speaker, I mean, that helps. But he, you know, he needs the support, he needs the people up there. We all need that. So that's just my thoughts for that, on that aspect of it.
That's great, Mary, and I think now we're getting somewhere. And I think that, you know, one of the motions that was passed was for the town council to continue to look at strategies to advocate with our state legislators. And hopefully that we can continue to build on some of Mary's thoughts and do so, and provide, again, more opportunities for engagement and advocacy.
As far as your suggestion with the roundtables, with all the input from the public, going back to Mr. Labonte, 2012 with the task force, is pretty much similar to what you're trying to accomplish with the outside input, suggestions, formulate something to give the feedback to the school department and the Joint Finance Committee. So, but if there is no other further, I would just like to suggest that going forward, again, I just want to thank everybody for coming out for another meeting, Mr. Chairman. I know the holidays are upon us with December, but I would like to project if we could get the schedule for the school department's meetings, which we already know will happen in January and February, and also the Warren Town Council and the Bristol Town Council, the meetings that we have scheduled with our workshops. So if you take those dates away, if we can reflect on other dates in January and February, and actually, I see Miss Aguirre in the audience, and what I really love what she does is when she schedules tentative dates, is she gives certain dates and then, you know, gets feedback from the majority. So if we could do that to get a consensus of getting that next meeting in before March, because that's when we will have our budgets.
Okay, so I think that's a great suggestion, and maybe I could reach out to Ms. Aguirre to assist me. To this meeting, I took a more direct approach and picked a date. And I do have to acknowledge that because of that approach, two of our JFC members, Steve Thompson and Tim Sweeney, weren't able to join us tonight. So we hope that they'll be with us next time. So what I will do is take a different approach to schedule the next meeting. I think as a placeholder, I'd like to contemplate something during the third week of January. But I think using the method you suggest would be advisable. So I will do that, and unless there's any other thoughts by committee members on the date to be determined and to be posted and published accordingly. Okay, with that, I'd be glad to entertain one
Making a
final
motion to adjourn?
Yeah, motion second. All in favor?
Aye.
Ayes have it, so moved. Thank you, everyone. I'm sorry? Left field. I don't know if I'm ready. It's been a long night. I don't know if I'm ready.